Even after the Second Punic War, when Carthage was humiliated and controlled by Rome, the Romans still felt that the rivalry lingered. Carthage had indeed grown weaker, but it had not disappeared. And for many in Rome, only the complete destruction of Carthage would bring peace. One of the biggest proponents of this idea was Senator Cato, who famously ended all his speeches with the phrase, "Carthage must be destroyed." Carthage, on the other hand, was trying to recover, but the conditions imposed by Rome were too harsh. They couldn't have an army or declare war without Rome's permission. This left Carthage practically defenseless, and to make matters worse, its neighbors were constantly attacking. Eventually, Carthage could no longer take it. They decided to defend themselves, and by doing so, broke the terms of the agreement with Rome. This gave Rome the excuse it had been waiting for, a reason to attack and finish Carthage once and for all. In 149 BC, Rome declared war for the third time. This time the goal was clear, to destroy Carthage once and for all. The city, once a great power, now stood alone, without allies and practically without an army. But they would not fall without a fight. Carthage began to prepare for the siege, knowing full well the immense power of Rome. When Carthage learned that Rome had declared war again, the city fell into despair. The situation was dire. They knew Rome wasn't coming just to fight, but to end everything once and for all. Carthage, already weakened by 2 brutal wars, had no real army. They were disarmed and with few defenses. But even so, the Carthaginians weren't about to surrender without a fight. With the little time they had, the city prepared as best it could. They armed anyone who could hold a sword. Men, women, the elderly, and even children helped build walls and produce weapons. They knew the siege was coming, and they had nowhere to run. It was fight or die. The spirit of resistance took hold of Carthage. Meanwhile, Rome was approaching in full force. The Romans were in no hurry, knowing the siege would take time, but they were willing to wait as long as necessary. The objective was simple: to destroy Carthage completely. The city was surrounded by land and sea, with no chance of outside help. Carthage stood alone, and Rome was determined not to leave a stone unturned. The tension in Carthage was palpable. They knew they were fighting for survival, but what could they do against the greatest military power of the time? Even so, the people of Carthage decided to fight to the end. For them, if destruction was their fate, they would fall fighting. When the Roman army finally reached Carthage, the siege truly began. The Romans were not in a rush. They surrounded the city by land and blocked the ports by sea. The goal was to leave Carthage without food, water, or any way out. The plan was simple: wait until the Carthaginians could no longer endure and were forced to surrender. But, as we've seen, the Carthaginians were not going to give up easily. Inside the city, the situation grew worse by the day. Food became scarce and desperation increased. Even so, the population continued to resist. They knew that if Carthage fell, everything would end. The Romans, on the other hand, tightened the siege even further, attacking from time to time, destroying small sections of the walls and testing Carthage's strength. The problem was that no matter how brave the Carthaginians were, they were fighting an enemy much stronger than themselves. With each Roman attack, Carthage lost more men, more resources, and the morale of the people slowly began to fall. Months into the siege, the city became increasingly isolated. The Romans, with patience, waited for the right moment to deliver the final blow. Rome knew there was no need to rush. They wanted to eliminate Carthage once and for all, which meant leaving no gaps. The siege was just the beginning of the end. Inside the city, the Carthaginians were beginning to realize that resistance had its limits. The situation was unsustainable, but even so, they resisted with everything they had. After months of siege, Carthage was on the brink of collapse. The food was almost completely gone, and hunger spread through the city. People did whatever they could to survive, but they knew it wouldn't last much longer. The Romans surrounded the city on all sides, and the Carthaginians, despite their courage, had no more strength left. The end was only a matter of time. That was when Rome decided it was time to end everything. They launched a massive final assault on the city's walls. The Roman army, led by Scipio Aemilianus, stormed into Carthage with full force. The city's defenses, already weakened, couldn't hold for long. Soon, the Romans were inside Carthage, and chaos ensued. Roman soldiers set fire to the city, destroying everything in their path. The flames spread quickly, and Carthage, once one of the most powerful cities in the Mediterranean, was now being completely destroyed. Smoke could be seen from afar, and the people of Carthage, who had fought until the end, now had nowhere left to run. Homes, temples, and even the symbols of Carthage's former glory were turning to ashes. What remained of the Carthaginian army was defeated, and many were killed or captured. The dream of resistance had ended. Carthage, which had long been a thorn in Rome's side, now lay in ruins. Even with the city in flames and chaos everywhere, there were still Carthaginians who refused to accept the end. A small group of soldiers and civilians decided to fight until the very last moment, taking their stand at the highest points in the city, especially at the citadel known as Byrsa, a natural fortress within Carthage. These men and women knew there was no hope left, but for them, surrender was not an option. The Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, were in no hurry to finish off this last resistance. They knew victory was assured, but the Carthaginian spirit impressed even the Roman generals. Every time the Romans advanced, these last defenders of Carthage did everything they could to hold them back. It was a fight without a future, but full of courage. Years of Carthaginian history and pride were symbolized in this final gasp of resistance. The siege of Byrsa was fierce. Hand-to-hand combat in the narrow, destroyed streets of the city became brutal, but little by little, the group of defenders grew weaker. With each new Roman assault, more Carthaginians fell. In the end, the citadel was taken, and the last survivors were either killed or captured. Carthage was finally and completely subdued. This last act of resistance did not change the city's fate, but it forever marked the bravery of those who refused to surrender. For Rome, it was the end of an enemy that had long represented a threat. For Carthage, it was the final chapter of a long history of power and pride. With Carthage's resistance completely crushed, Rome decided that merely destroying the city wasn't enough. They wanted to ensure that Carthage would never rise again. The order was clear: destroy everything, leave no stone unturned. The Romans, led by Scipio Aemilianus, began the task of eradicating what remained of the city. First, they burned all the buildings that were still standing. The fire consumed temples, houses, markets, everything that symbolized Carthage's past glory. But Rome wanted more than that. They didn't want Carthage to ever be a future threat. So, the Romans did something symbolic and final. They salted the earth. This was a way of saying that nothing would ever grow there again. The idea was to guarantee that Carthage would never rise from the ashes. For the people of Carthage, what was left was complete humiliation. The few survivors were sold as slaves and scattered throughout the Roman Empire. The name Carthage, which once stood for power and wealth, now symbolized total defeat and destruction. Rome had achieved what it wanted: to erase Carthage from the map and from history. The salted earth became a symbol of Roman victory and the final fall of Carthage. What had once been one of the most powerful cities in the Mediterranean was now nothing but ruins. Rome's message was clear: anyone who opposed them would meet the same fate. From then on, Rome became even stronger, with no rivals left to challenge its might. When Rome finally destroyed Carthage, the initial feeling was one of relief and victory. They had at last eliminated the enemy that had threatened their supremacy in the Mediterranean for so many years. Rome had won 3 wars against Carthage, and now no rival could compete with its power in the region. Rome was, without a doubt, the dominant force. But behind the victory, there was also concern. The Romans knew that the destruction of Carthage marked the end of an era. The constant wars with Carthage had, in a way, defined Rome's growth. Without this rival, what would come next? Many in Rome began to question what the next step would be. They knew that with great power came new challenges, and the biggest challenge would be maintaining control over the vast territory they now possessed. Additionally, there was a fear within Rome. The destruction of Carthage had been so complete and brutal that some Romans wondered, what if this someday happens to Rome? what they had done to Carthage could someone one day try to do to them. It was a strange feeling of fear mixed with pride. Rome's greatness was assured, but the weight of being the greatest power in the ancient world also brought its insecurities. While the generals celebrated, the Roman Senate was already thinking about what to do with the lands and people that now fell under their control. They needed to manage an empire that was expanding faster than they had expected. The challenge now was to maintain power, deal with new rebellions, and at the same time find new enemies to keep the Roman army, which always needed battles, active. Now, with the mighty Carthage gone, the Western Mediterranean was under Roman control. They now dominated nearly all the trade routes, territories, and islands that once belonged to Carthage. This control over the sea, known as Mare Nostrum, our sea, allowed Rome not only to grow economically, but also to further strengthen its military and political power. Roman expansion did not stop there. With the lands of Africa and Spain now under their control, Rome began to explore these new territories. These regions were rich in natural resources such as grain, precious metals, and slaves. The Romans quickly integrated these resources into their economy, making the city of Rome even more. And of course, this prosperity led to new constructions, roads, and the expansion of Roman influence to the farthest corners of the empire. However, with this growth came new challenges. Controlling such vast lands required an even larger army and a more efficient administration. Additionally, Rome knew that power had to be maintained by force. The destruction of Carthage showed the world that no one should challenge Rome, but it also made other nations look at the empire with fear and distrust. The growth of Rome also meant that it would have to deal with more revolts and resistance within its new territories. Rome now found itself facing a new world. With the Mediterranean in its hands, the next step would be to expand eastward, facing empires like Macedonia and the Hellenistic kingdoms. The victory over Carthage was a milestone, but it was also the beginning of a new phase of conquests, conflicts, and eventually the management of an empire that would grow to become nearly unbeatable. Rome was no longer just an expanding city. It had become the dominant power of the entire Western Mediterranean. But this victory was not only military, it marked a shift in how the Romans saw the world and themselves. Rome began to view itself not merely as a nation, but as a force that would shape the history of other civilizations. The idea that Rome was destined to lead the ancient world became even stronger. The victory over Carthage opened the doors for the empire to spread into new territories, incorporating various cultures and peoples. Rome started absorbing and influencing other civilizations in a more intense way, bringing innovations in areas such as architecture, engineering, and governance. The Romans also learned to integrate what they conquered, maintaining political control over vast regions while creating cultural ties with their new subjects. The impact of this victory was also felt within Rome itself. The city had to deal with the challenge of governing an ever larger empire, which required new forms of administration and an always active army. What had begun as a series of wars for survival had now transformed into the need to maintain control over a vast territory. The victory over Carthage also brought reflections on how far Rome could grow without wearing itself out. Meanwhile, Rome's ambitions turned toward new horizons. After this victory, Rome solidified its control over the Mediterranean, but this also brought responsibilities. They had to deal with revolts, manage new lands, and ensure that the government system could support such expansion. The empire was only just beginning, but what came next would test Rome's ability to stay united and strong. The destruction of Carthage was a milestone that changed the course of history, not only eliminating a rival, but also shaping Rome's identity. From this war, Rome grew in ambition and power, and the ancient world would never be the same. With the end of major external rivalries, Rome prepared for a period of consolidation and internal growth. The city, which had started as a simple village, was now becoming the center of a vast and diverse empire. The conquests allowed new ideas, cultures, and innovations to circulate throughout the Roman territory, bringing not only wealth, but also profound transformations. This new chapter would be marked by advances in every sense, from laws to the construction of grand works, to the creation of a network of roads that would connect the empire like never before. Rome was at the height of its power, and the future would bring not only wars, but also periods of peace and prosperity, known as the Pax Romana. From here, Rome would begin to shape the destiny of the ancient world in a way that would be remembered for centuries. If you want to learn more about this glorious path of Rome and the challenges it faced to keep its empire standing, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There's much more epic history coming your way.